This meeting is being recorded.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us for our webinar series today, which is Stages of Dementia, What to Expect and How to Find Moments of Joy. Our next webinar will be Thursday, July 13th. We would like all of you to please put your questions in the chat and what topics you might like to learn about next. I'm Paige Fairbanks-Gunn, the Relationship Manager with Koelsch Communities in Arizona. I've been in senior housing industry since 1997, and I have worked with over 4,000 families. Koelsch Community operates in 8 states, and we are family owned and operated since 1958. We have independent living, assisted living, memory care, respite care, and day stay services, along with a lot of other resources. All of our assisted living communities, including our memory care, all operate with a licensed nurse on site 24/7. Koelsch Communities offers exceptional care throughout, and we have so many resources, including our speaker today. Our speaker today is a national caregiving speaker and consultant. She provides a path to relieve the fear, anxiety, and overwhelm that family members experience when a loved one is diagnosed with dementia. She is the founder of Alzheimer's Family Consulting. She's a certified senior advisor, a certified dementia practitioner, and a certified in dementia care. She's also the author of the highly rated It's Not That Simple, Helping Families Navigate the Alzheimer's Journey, which is based on Pam's 14-year dementia and Alzheimer's caregiving journey with both her parents. Please welcome Pam Ostrowski.
Thank you so much, Paige, and I appreciate you inviting me to have this presentation and conversation. I prefer to call them conversations because it gives us a chance for everyone to interact, ask their questions. So we use the slides as a guideline, but if you have any questions while we're on slides, either pop it into your question into the chat, or you can raise your hand using the icons at the bottom of the page. And you should be all set in order to be able to do that. So we look forward to hearing from you during this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but I want to share something first. So Paige had mentioned that she and I have worked together. I work with families who are in a situation where they either suspect their loved one has dementia, or that they already know that they've been diagnosed with dementia, but maybe not Alzheimer's or Lewy body or vascular dementia. So we're kind of coming from the place of what questions do you have? And your loved one could be in any one of these stages. So let's go ahead and get started so that we can make sure that you have the information you need. Feel free to screen capture any of these slides, or what we can do if you would like is I can put some of the content on the link with the recording. So either way, whatever works for you, you just let us know, because this is all about us working together. So where this came from actually is you guys. We did a poll with everyone that was on the email list, and said, what do you want to hear about next? And many of you came back and said, we want to hear about the stages of dementia. I want to know what to expect. And then the other half of that was, and how bad is this going to get? And what can I do to engage my loved one as they progress in the disease? And believe me, I can relate to that situation. Here's a picture of my mom. We're actually in Rock Creek in Surprise, Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. And Rock Creek is one of the Koelsch communities. And Mom spent 3 years there. Getting excellent care. And my book is written based on that 14-year journey I had with my mom. It's more than it's not a story, it's a guidebook. It goes through all the questions that you might have, things to look for, options for care, visiting, communications, engagement, everything that you could possibly imagine in the journey. So if you have questions and need some answers, that's probably a good place to start if you're not necessarily ready to talk with somebody. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the poll. We're going to start this with a poll. And I want to make sure, let's make sure that Zoom is going to allow me to, oh, there it is. Okay, so poll. we're going to see what you guys think about these two questions. So the first question is, what stage of dementia do you believe your loved one is in? So please pick the one that you believe they're in. And then the second one is, on a scale of 1 to 7, how would you rate your skills in creating moments of joy? This will help us tailor the conversation a bit more. And we only have about 43% who have clicked on a button, so please continue. And then answer the second question as well, so that we have an idea of how do you think you're doing in helping you and your loved one feel happier, to have those moments of joy. And Paige, can you see the results as they come up?
Yes.
Okay, good. So right now, it looks like mid-stage is the predominant situation for about half the people that are on the call right now. And then not everybody answered number 2. And so sometimes that's because people don't know what moments of joy are. Like, what is that? So we're going to talk about that right now, as a matter of fact. And be sure to, I can go ahead and share the results so you guys can see them. And then I'm going to stop sharing and move on to you guys staying, because we have an amazing offer at the very end of this. And I want to make sure that you guys take advantage of it, because you've made the effort to attend. So let's talk about why we're even here. Like, what's the sense of urgency? What's the need? And so here's some educational points. There's over 100 types of dementia. And I want you to understand that dementia is a condition, not a disease. The diseases are when they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a disease. Lewy body, vascular, those are all types of dementia. And so it's important for you to know, though, that 60 to 80% of those diagnosed with dementia will eventually be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. That's what we've heard in research through the Alzheimer's Association. And so the default diagnosis is usually Alzheimer's. But get this, you can have more than one type of dementia. So you could have Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And so in that situation, you've got different types of behaviors happening and different types of capabilities that may be somehow inhibited. So here's some interesting data as well. So 1 in 9 people over the age of 65 have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And that means then there's 10,000 people are turning 65 every day, because welcome to the baby boomer generation. And what that means is, when you're walking around at the grocery store, at a restaurant, getting your oil changed, whatever it might be, 1 out of 5 people will be over 65. 1 out of 5. The data is actually 22%, but 1 out of 5 is close enough. And then the other part of this is that the Alzheimer's journey is, on average, 4 to 8 years after diagnosis. So as an example, my mom had dementia for 6 years, and then she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And then we moved into assisted living and memory care eventually. So the thing to keep in mind, and this is one of the possible topics, so heads up, about the cost of assisted living and memory care. And for us, it cost about $375,000. And this was back in 2007 to 2015. So it depends on where you're at in the country, but it also depends on the level of care that your loved one needs and some other factors that are important. So Paige and I have been talking about doing a webinar just on, like, how do you know where to go and how much it costs and what to take into account. So we'll be doing a poll at the end about that. Now, if you're a caregiver, which I believe most of you are, there's about 42 million Americans providing unpaid care to an adult 50 or over. 42 million. And that's just in 2020, right? 1 month, right? It's significantly higher than that now, I believe, especially because of COVID. Then there's 23.7. So let's call it 24 hours a week is the average amount of time caregivers spend providing unpaid care. with people that they don't live with. And those who live with a care recipient provide even more care, which kind of makes sense because you come home to that individual. The average age of a caregiver is 49.2. So it actually skewing younger than I anticipated. I don't know what you guys thought about that, but 48, so almost 50% are caring for a parent. So I'm sharing these statistics with you because it's important that we understand the size of this journey and what's happening, and we need to create a better journey. So let's get started with the stages of dementia. The first thing I want to emphasize is that every journey is different. Every person is unique. So my mom started with anxiety with her initial symptoms, and then she started losing things, like she couldn't remember where she set them. And then things got more difficult she couldn't do as many tasks. And then as the disease progressed, she ended up losing her words 7 years before she passed. So she couldn't have a conversation. And then 5 years before she passed, she couldn't walk anymore because her brain, where the Alzheimer's was attacking those brain cells, affected mobility and motion and balance. And so she just couldn't do that anymore. So that does not mean that your loved one's going to go through any of that. I know completely conversant. Now, it doesn't necessarily make sense, but conversant people with Alzheimer's who are just chattering away about memories from 30 or 40 years ago and very happy. My mom was very happy. It was just a challenge to find out what was going on with her because she couldn't express herself in words. So here's the stages. And I do want to give you a caveat because I've had people say to me, well, my loved one is in stage 6. Oh, my loved one's in stage 2. Well, they don't really work that way, the numbers and everything. So there's research out there that there's a little bit of research that actually categorizes them from stages 1 to 7. But in reality, it's much easier and more accurate even to go through preclinical, mild cognitive impairment, mid-stage, and late stage, and just leave it at that. We don't need to put a number on our individuals. They have enough going on. So preclinical, I don't know if you guys knew this, but the changes in the brain that drive the behaviors of Alzheimer's in particular happen at least 18 to 20 years before you actually see those symptoms. So we're going to talk a bit about, here, what can you do to avoid that? Well, if you're an adult child, so you're looking you're in your 50s, early 60s, eat clean, meaning not a lot of chemicals, no processed foods, not a lot of alcohol, all that good stuff, and stay hydrated. We get so busy, we forget to drink water or iced tea or, whatever your favorite beverage is. Exercising your body and your mind. So sitting on phone calls all day long is not exercising your mind. Learning something new is. So think about ways to do that. And then reducing your stress. I don't know about you guys, but I think most people who are caregivers are stressed. And so that's why respite is so important. And a shout out to Koelsch because they do have respite programs that are from 1 day to a couple of weeks. And Paige can be the resource for that. But it's a way to reduce stress. Paige and I were talking just before we started opening the door for you guys that, there was a story where a caregiver passed away. That's not unusual because they were exhausted, and it makes you subject to disease and illness and weakness. And it's really important as part of these stages for you to realize that you've got to take care of you or you won't be here for them. So the next stage is mild cognitive impairment or early stage dementia, and then mid stage and late stage. So that's the way we're going to cover all of this today. One other point that I like to emphasize, simply because people misunderstand. For instance, I could say, oh, I must, beginning signs of dementia, I can't remember where I put my keys. Well, it could be that I was on the phone at the same time that I set my keys down, in which case my brain can only do one thing at a time. As much as we'd love to think that we can multitask, we can't. So it's important for you to focus as you get older on what the task is at hand. A friend of mine calls it stay where your feet are. And it helps you to stay focused on what it is that you're doing at that very moment. because you cannot do two things at one time. You can do them pretty rapidly, but you cannot do them at the same time. So pseudo-dementia is fake dementia. In other words, you're exhibiting symptoms that other people might say, oh, well, you're starting to show signs of dementia. It could be nutrition. So if you haven't been eating well, or if you haven't been hydrating. So remember, we're supposed to, especially if you live in the Phoenix area when things get hot, but it's summertime, we're all going to be hot. And it's important for us to be drinking, 100 ounces to 128 ounces. Yes, that's a gallon of water or fluids, non-dehydrating fluids every day. And non-dehydrating fluids would not include alcohol, because that is a dehydrating fluid. So alcohol does affect how the brain functions. Exercise. So going out and doing a 10-minute walk in the morning and a 10-minute walk in the evening is a great contribution to your exercise. You don't have to go to the gym and run on a treadmill. You can do something as simple as a short walk in the morning and a short walk in the evening. And that's another reason to get a dog, by the way, because they make sure that you do that. We also want to do mental stimulation. So we want to make sure that you're engaging socially, because when people engage socially, it's not just that there's another human being in the room. It has more to do with what you're talking about. It's also, when you think about socialization and stimulation, when a couple lives together by themselves, they don't learn much because they're both exposed to the exact same thing during the exact same time. So it's important for you guys to get out of the house and go hang out with other people to learn what they learned that day. What did they experience? And that's what stimulates the brain. Sleep. Oh my gosh. If you don't get enough sleep, I think everybody knows when you don't get enough sleep, you don't function well. And that can show up as signs of dementia as well. And stress, hormones, not having the right supplements. So if you don't have enough vitamin D, you're kind of have brain fog. So that's just an example, but you want to make sure when you go to your doctor that you engage with them and ask them for a lab test that runs everything. So all of your minerals, all of your metals, magnesium, and so forth, and make sure that everything is in balance for you, because that's also a very unique lab test. And then finally, toxins, right? So we breathe air. Like this morning, there was smoke in the air from a fire here in Arizona, in Phoenix area. And, it just doesn't smell good. But not only that, but it gets into your lungs, and that translates into brain fog. So it's important for us to look at these things and use this as your checklist to say, okay, if I'm concerned about my loved one, are they actually dehydrated? Because that can happen. We had one family where the husband did not want to take his mom or his wife into memory care. And so she only wanted to eat watermelon and Jell-O. And so that's all he gave her. She lost 20 pounds. She was dehydrated. And it was very sad. And finally his daughter said, well, we have to take mom to memory care, because she's just not doing well. And she was failing. Once we got some food into her, took about 12 weeks for her to recover to a better state, where she then was able to say her daughter's name, tell her she loved her. It was a heartwarming story, but a very sad one, because the husband wanted to be the caregiver and he couldn't. He didn't have the skills. And so it's important that we keep that in mind when we're looking at this situation. My dad couldn't get my mom to take her medication. Only a professional caregiver in assisted living could. So we had to move because dad couldn't do it. And so these are the things that you have to think about. Now, one of the questions was about moments of joy, and not very many people answered that question. So let's clarify what we mean by moments of joy. It can be as simple as joining them in an activity at a care community. It could be going to a senior center and participating with them in an activity. Usually, the spouse, if you're a spouse, or even an adult child, you're hesitant. Like, well, no, I'm just going to drop them off, and then they can stay there. But why not stay and make them feel comfortable, and do that a couple of times before you walk them in and say, you know what, I'm going to go run some errands and I'll be back in a little bit. And that way they feel like they're not being segmented out or separated from you because there's something wrong with them. We really have to think about that and be sensitive to that. And so you could do something like my mom and dad. My dad used to play music for mom and they would sing together. And she didn't remember all the words, so it was pretty interesting. But the other thing, it could be as simple as folding laundry, sorting socks, looking at who doesn't have a plastic container or a plastic bag full of buttons? Drop them out onto the table and say, all right, let's sort these by size, and take small ones, big ones, middle-sized ones, or sort them by color. But these are all brain stimulation, depending on the stage that your loved one is in with dementia. You can do coloring projects. Like a lot of people have the mandala coloring book or an adult coloring book, not a little one, but an adult coloring book with flowers and that type of thing. And just being able, it's very Zen-like to be able to sit and draw with your loved one. It's not something that they have to do by themselves. It should be something that you do together. And that could be true of adult children and spouses. And then finally, paints rocks. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but when you walk around some of the care communities, there's little painted rocks with the word love or heart, and the residents have painted those. And, it's something kind of fun and cool to do. And it also creates a nice memory, especially if you do it or you bring in a grandchild. It's just a nice thing to do that you get to keep. Same is true with putting photos or stickers and albums. It's an activity. And that's what we mean by moments of joy. It means that no, your loved one will probably not remember that activity, but they will remember that they had fun and they remember emotions. So rather than sitting there and talking to them about what happened to your day, which they are not going to remember and probably are not going to be interested in, sorry, if you do something with them, it's going to be much more memorable for them, much more engaging for them. They will feel that happiness. You can laugh, you can tell jokes, but it depends on their stage, right? The later, the more difficult it is to be able to understand humor. And so we want to do things with them. They will remember that you were with them on these activities. So that's what's important. Okay, let's start with the first one, which is mild cognitive impairment and early stage. Now, you could separate these two out. Mild cognitive impairment is obviously a lesser version of what early stage is. But in both cases, they're going to have problems remembering names, recalling recent events, remembering where they might have put something of value, like where's the checkbook? Where are my glasses? Where are my keys? They're not going to be good at making plans. They have difficulty staying organized. So I have a client right now whose mom, who used to be a killer dresser and very organized and structured. There's clothes everywhere. She wears the same thing multiple days in a row. She's lost that capacity to be engaged with what she enjoyed before, which is clothing and being organized. And so one of the activities I suggested to her daughter is to go ahead and help her get organized, because it can be disorienting to someone to have a different world than they were used to living in. So it's like, all right, well, let's just fold all the clothes and put them back, and then ask a caregiver to make sure that your loved one has clean clothes put out for them, and put the dirty clothes in a hamper. So, and lastly, managing money. Managing money is a very difficult thing for those with mild cognitive impairment and early stage. And, that's just something that we need to be aware of from a privacy and security perspective. So if your loved one has a debit card or a credit card, you need to put a limit on that is so small that if they decide to use it, that you're not really going to lose a lot of money. And that's why we use credit cards instead of debit cards. That's a different webinar. But I want to make sure that you understand where their constraints are, where they could be. It's not, all of these things don't happen to a person all the time. And like I said, it's unique, but you may see some of these symptoms in the mild cognitive impairment and early stages of dementia. And so your friends and family and neighbors may notice these changes and alert you. So it's important for them to understand a bit more about this particular stage. So I've broken these out into communicating and living arrangements, eating and drinking, as well as stimulation. So each of the stages that we go through will have those categories of information. So with mild cognitive impairment, you may find yourself answering the same question over and over again. That's one of the big clues that the person probably has, if not Alzheimer's, some other form of dementia, because they have no short-term memory. That's a real strong indicator for Alzheimer's, to be honest with you. They may be confused about your instructions. Your instructions might be simple as, why don't grab your coat, we're going out for dinner. And they just sit down in the chair and they don't do anything. Well, it's a matter of you then not just grabbing their coat for them, which you could do and say, here, let me put this on you. But instead to be able to say, I'll tell you what, I'll grab our shoes and let's put them on together. You show, don't tell. That's the number one. If you take anything away from this presentation, show, don't tell, because they can't process the words. They can lose their word association with shoes and let's go, for instance. So we want to make sure that we understand how to communicate with them. And also remember, I was just talking with a family member today, and I said, did you show him how to do that, or did you tell him? She's like, oh, I started out telling him. And, yesterday he didn't remember that, but today he did. And I said, that's the roller coaster we're on. So just because your loved one doesn't remember somebody's name last week doesn't mean they won't remember it this week, which adds to the challenges that we face and the situations that we face when we have a loved one with dementia. So really what it comes down to is that you have to get creative about how you make requests, how you ask questions. Avoid trying to solve the problem. You never argue with a person with dementia, because they will always win, and you'll both be sad and upset and frustrated because you're not communicating. And that happens with anybody, dementia or not. When we don't communicate well, we both get frustrated and angry with each other. This is not their fault. They're not doing this intentionally. I had to put that in the slide deck because someone said, I think he's just trying to make me upset. I said, probably not. Is that something he used to do? And she said, no, but I just think he's doing it on purpose. And so we had to have a talk about that, because it's not on purpose and they just don't know. And so you have to act out most of what you're trying to communicate as the disease progresses. Again, this is going to be different from week to week. One of my dementia Q&A participants said, or hour to hour. So know that this is a very variable experience for you. Now let's talk a bit about living arrangements. So when the symptoms first start, your loved one is usually living at home with their spouse, or you're the spouse. And it's possible that they're not going out. That's another good clue that they know something's wrong. So I've had grandparents not go to soccer games because, I don't really feel like it, or, I don't want to go. Well, the reason they don't want to go is because it exposes their issues to a larger group of people. I don't want to embarrass my spouse. I don't want to embarrass my children. I don't want to embarrass my grandchildren. And they're internalizing. At this stage, they can internalize that something is wrong. In addition to that, when something's wrong, they also get pretty angry with themselves. So when you get angry with yourself, you kind of lash out at everybody else. So keep that in mind if you have a situation where your loved one is kind of frustrated. That's, you can sit down and say, well, tell me what's going on, and see if they can. At this stage, many times they will just say something's wrong, or I'm stupid. I don't have any memory. I'm just getting old, so they'll self-deprecate. And so we want to reassure them, hey, you know what? Things happen. I'm here for you. I love you. And we'll just get through this together. So we're a sense of reassurance. Then, the important part of that is if they are living at home, either alone or with a spouse or partner, invite friends over, have game night, do something that engages them. And we're going to talk about what the moments of joy are with this stage. So sit tight for other ideas. But this is really about getting out of the house or bringing people in when they live at home, live in their own home. And then to, really maintain the best level of independence as possible. Help them find ways to stimulate their brain and engage. We know that living alone and being isolated is a key driver to dementia acceleration. In other words, you look at COVID and the people who were in memory care at the time, what they lacked was really a sense of purpose. So instead, they might look forward to your visit and now they're alone. Same is true if if they live at home in their own apartment. And so it speeds the disease progression, and we don't want that to happen. We want them to be as independent and have the best quality of life as possible for as long as possible. So there's ways around that, in order to address it, especially if you have a loved one. And this is happening more and more. There's a lot more single people out there living alone. And so bringing in an in-home helper, I don't necessarily call them a caregiver, because a lot of times that offends people. Like, I don't need any care, I'm fine. But if you say a helper, someone who might do some light cleaning, housekeeping, light cooking, just be a companion. You see the visiting angels commercials all the time. That's pretty much what you're looking for, is someone to kind of take the load off of you as a caregiver. And more importantly, perhaps, is to stimulate your loved one's brain. So to get them to engage more with somebody new. Now let's talk about eating and drinking. So it's not unusual, even in the earliest stages, for them to forget if they've eaten or not. And they're not getting the satiety symptoms, when you feel hungry and your tummy's rumbling, they don't get that necessarily. So they may eat twice as much because they don't remember eating the first time. Or what I've seen too is they don't eat at all. I just ate. Now, it might have been yesterday. So it's really important to watch what their food intake and liquid or fluid intake is. They just don't remember. It's not their fault. So it's really important to focus on the hydration. And as we get older, we drink less. That just makes me want to have a sip of water, but we drink less. We just either don't think it's important or what it is. But I'll tell you what, everybody grab a glass of water right now and take a sip. Here's what happens to the brain. I don't know that you can see my hands, but so your brain is like, you've seen a picture of a brain. So let's just do this. This is a brain. And then as it dehydrates, those folds that you see in all the pictures, they start folding in on themselves a little bit. Well, you don't want your brain folding in on itself, because that starts showing signs of pseudodementia. Those signs where you go, well, that's something wrong. So when in doubt, give your loved one cranberry juice, orange juice, iced tea, water with a lemon in it, something that flavors it a little bit. Anything that you can, and lemonade, any of those things. Well, and then see how things go from there. But obviously 1 8-ounce glass is not going to tip the scales one way or the other, but dehydration is something we all need to take more seriously. All right, so let's talk about stimulation at this stage. This is where I would say stimulation is critical in all stages, but really right here, this is where the rubber hits the road as far as getting your loved one to maintain their independence for the longest period of time possible. So if you don't make stimulation a priority, it could mean that if you're an adult child, you're going to have to leave your job. It could mean that you've got to find other resources to help take care of your loved one, because they're not as independent as they could have been. So let's take it from what we know and doing the best that we possibly can. And that could be taking them to a senior activity center and doing that 2 or 3 times a week. First you're going to have to integrate them once a week, but there's a activity center here for everybody. It's not dementia focused. And it was amazing. The spouse was really hesitant. Well, he's not going to like it. And he's going to be embarrassed. And I said, it's just activities, to try it. And so they just swooped him up and started doing things with him. He didn't want to leave 4 hours after he got there. And now he goes 3 times a week. So, and he loves it. And I said, so what are you doing for you during that period of time? That's a whole other conversation, because that's where I spend most of my time, is helping the caregivers find their lives and not be so worried about their loved one, as long as they're willing to let go and get the best care possible for their loved one. Because honestly, as a caregiver, you aren't always the right person. You don't have the right skills or the training. It's time to let them go and live their lives and not cling on to them really tightly. So again, I mentioned this earlier, schedule a game night, and do a game that everybody has to learn. so that it doesn't seem like the one person is struggling at all. Or do a game that they know really well that you like. Gin Rummy was our family game from the time I was like 6 years old. So, everybody knew that. And mom could probably have played that if she could have spoken till her dying day. So games, Monopoly, anything that would be fun and keeps the brain moving and figuring things out. That's really analytical types of activities as well as learning activities. And then social time. I mean, I say here weekly, it would be nice to do it at least 2 to 3 times a week, if not daily. It's just really important for that brain to be stimulated by other people's experiences. One of the things my dad actually blames himself for is that he kind of kept mom at home in wraps, like bubble wrap. And he's like, we should have done more. And so we had to go through the whole, let's not should ourselves to death. You did the best you could with the skills that you had and the knowledge that you had. And I'm not sure it would have made any difference for her because she was already in mid-stage before we ever got her into assisted living or got her into any activities or engagement. So I also want you, and this is your homework, write down things that make you and you believe that your loved one laugh. Laughter is so powerful. And so share stories from 20 to 50 years ago, depending on how old your loved one is. Write them down because we're going to use that homework later on when they've progressed initially you can use those with them and then write them down. And then you're going to use them later on as the disease progresses. And one of my final things for the mild cognitive impairment in early stage, they can still usually talk at this point. And you need to record this on video because video, and I can tell you this from my heart, you get them back when they've progressed far enough where you don't have any way to communicate with them or that you just really miss them. A video recording of them at this stage means a lot, and it will help you through the journey because it makes you smile. It warms your heart. Is this a sad disease? Absolutely. But there are moments of joy. There are things that you can do to make it better. So let's move on to mid-stage. So this is typically the longest stage. This is taken from the Alzheimer's Association. And I would raise a caveat to it to say that it really depends on the individual. But with my mom, I would say, yeah, mid-stage was probably the longest. Early stage seemed to last forever, but this is, remember, dementia, and then your stage of diagnosis goes on from there. So that's 6 years for dementia, but then she was probably, 5 or 6 years more in mid-stage, and then late stage, she was 2 or 3 years. So here's the things to look for from a symptom perspective. Again, they're not necessarily going to have all of these. They may have some of them. They may have one of them. They may have something totally different. It really depends on the type of dementia, but they'll have trouble remembering events. So again, that's more exacerbated than it was in the mild cognitive impairment. Something that would be really important to them may just totally slip by without them remembering. A lot of it has to do with temporal recognition. They don't know what day it is. They don't know what a calendar is. I had one daughter who's like, oh, well, I've written down her appointments on her calendar. I don't know why she doesn't know any better. Like, because she has dementia, that the 5th and the 8th don't mean anything differently to her. So really trying, my purpose in life at this point in time is to help you as caregivers understand that they're not doing things intentionally to mess up and not attend something or miss an event. They just don't remember. They can't. So they have problems learning new things. So you have to be really patient, compassionate, and kind, because you may have learned it, like the card game, but if you can give them a little bit of time, more time than we would normally. So it might be, you would expect a response in 10 seconds, and it may take 20, 30, seconds more for them to register, process, and then communicate back out. So if you're patient, bring your friends over that are patient because it's going to take a little while. And whatever you do, don't pressure them because that just gets them more anxious and it inhibits their ability to remember even more. They have trouble with complicated types of activities. So for instance, planning dinner. Well, we need a vegetable, we need protein, we need a carbohydrate, and something for dessert, of course. And it's too hard, right? It's like, oh, I don't know. What do you want? And I had one couple where the husband said, we have the same thing every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And, I said, well, so that's a routine and that's fine, but it doesn't allow your wife to have a choice to pick out something. Now, she's not going to prepare it, but why not say, well, would you like spaghetti or chicken tonight? Oh, spaghetti sounds good. And so give them that opportunity to, even though they can't prepare it, to have a choice, because we don't want to become helicopter caregivers. We don't want to take their choices away from them, because again, now you're taking away engagement and stimulation because you want to expedite how things work. What a great way to do that, with a routine that is so repetitive that nobody has to think about it. That's a great way to vegetate your brain. So they're also going to have difficulty with names, but not so much with like their own life, right? So they can remember things that happened to them, but they're not going to necessarily remember things like high school graduation. Oh, we just went there last week. Oh, okay. And they might not engage as much with that. And that's the part where you have to prepare your other family members that, yes, grandma was at the graduation, but grandma doesn't necessarily remember it. So relive it with her and say, oh my gosh, it was so amazing to walk up on that stage and get and she will relive it with you. So make it a moment of joy. Make it something that you can relive a memory, and it's a positive thing for your heart and your mind, for everyone. And then, of course, they might have some problems with reading, writing, and working with numbers. So this is the long-term challenge, right? So when you're in mid-stage, look at the bulleted list here. I'm only going to highlight a few of these. Again, we'll have the recording here, but if you have questions on these, feel free to reach out to me at pam@itsnotthatsimple.com. But you will be in a situation where you will say something and they will look at you like you're from a different planet. They have no idea what you're talking about. You repeating yourself and saying the exact same thing in the exact same way is not going to get a different result. It's the definition of insanity, right? So if you say, go take your shower, and they just sit there, that means that you get to change your words to something like, let's go get washed up, or whatever term you use. And you go with them and you get out the soap and the washcloth. And a lot of people in mid-stage do not like to take showers. It's like a scary place. So we want to make sure that they're comfortable and aren't scared. So maybe they may end up doing, one of my clients calls it a spit bath, but you just get the washcloth nice and wet and put some soap on it and say, okay, here's your washcloth. You get your own. You're going to be really squeaky clean, by the way. And you both, wash your face and, the body parts and everything. You can, if they go into the shower, make sure that there's only like a bar of soap. Don't use body wash, because in our minds, a bar of soap is soap. A thing with a lid or a pump is typically shampoo or conditioner. So don't bother with the conditioner. Just make it a shampoo and a bar of soap and a washcloth. Keep it simple. You might want to make sure that your shower is equipped with handrails, as well as a way for you to be there with them if they're okay with that. You can just say, hey, I'm just here folding towels, and then fold the same towel 3 million times until they're done with their shower. That's how we keep them safe, while also, again, keeping them independent. They might have difficulty with expressing words, finding the right words. And they might say, so I had one client whose mom said that she was having surgery tomorrow, and she kept pushing on her tummy. And I said, well, what did you? She said, Mom, you're not having surgery. And she's did the, slit the neck, stop it sign. And I said, you didn't do that, did you? And she's like, well, yeah, I wanted her to stop saying that. And I said, okay, well, here's another way to do that probably would have worked a little bit better, is to ask her why she keeps poking her tummy. Like, does it hurt? Is it ow? And you poke your tummy and you say, does it hurt? Ow? And see how they react. Because if, like, my mom had no way to tell me if she had a UTI, if she had, chest congestion, unless you could hear it. There was no communication on her part. And so I would poke myself and say, does this hurt? Ow. And then I would touch like her wrist. She had done something with her wrist, and I touched it, and then I touched mine and I said, ow. And she said, yes. So she was still in there, by the way. They are still in there. You just have to figure out and get creative about how you get through that veil of amyloid plaque and tau protein tangles to get them to be able to respond. And then you have to not be literal about understanding their response. Just because she said surgery didn't mean that was the word. She meant stomach, right? She's poking at her tummy. So you have to pay attention to the possibilities of how they communicate in mid stages and late stages, because it's not literal is not the way to go. That's not how they communicate, because they can't. Their brain can't access the right words, and we have to be cautious with what conclusions we jump to in that particular case. So most of all, but I want you to be respectful with your loved one and make sure that they feel like they're loved. Living arrangements. Okay. So you need to be aware of unsafe behaviors because it could be they leave a stove top on. They don't know what the knobs are. It could just be they'll turn stuff on and walk away. So living at home starts to become very challenging unless you have in-home care or you move to a care community. Those are your options, basically. You need help, because this person, as they progress, they need 24/7 eyes on care. Because if they're not stimulated and exercised and constantly having something going on during the day, they're going to wake up. Well, they're going to they call it, I'll remember it in a second, dementia joke. But it's sundowning syndrome. And they basically start getting antsy and frustrated and stuff. And that's because they haven't done anything all day. When you go to a place like Rock Creek, the Koelsch community where my mom was at, they got her up at 6:30, get her dressed, get her to breakfast. She ate breakfast, then they had an activity, then they had a snack. Then they made maybe have gone in and done another activity before lunch, then chill time for, watch a movie or something, and then another activity, and then dinner, and then bed. And nobody that I ever saw, that doesn't mean it didn't happen, but I saw very little, if any, sundowning when I would visit. And it's because you've kept them busy. You've tired them out. And that's what you need to do in order to get some sleep at night. And having an in-home care person can be very expensive, which is one of the reasons I'm grateful that we had Rock Creek and Koelsch to support us on this journey, because I don't know how we would have gotten through it without that type of quality of care. So if you're going to bring somebody in, make sure that they're dementia trained. They're not, now you've gone from helper to dementia trained caregiver, because the helper isn't going to know exactly what to do with the communication side of things. So dementia training will help them with that. It's also much higher likelihood of them falling or being unstable on their feet, because again, you don't know where the brain cells are dying in their brain, right? Because even if you did an MRI, you'd have to do a PET scan in order to find out what areas are being affected. So that's really important. Now is the time, if you haven't already, to research memory care. Now, if they're early stages, you could go into assisted living and make this whole transition a little bit easier on yourself. My dad moved in with my mom. He was independent living level of care, and she was assisted living level of care. Then when mom increased her need, dad kind of needed some help too. So he became assisted and she became memory care, but they lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment up until things got really bad and she needed a Hoyer lift and 2 caregivers to help toilet her and that type of thing. So then dad couldn't stay with her in that environment. But, they had 3 or 4 years of them living together, but having help nearby and having food that was nutritious and being able to drink beverages that were easy to access and that weren't hard to remember. So, that's ultimately where we end up with eating and drinking is sugary foods will become a favorite of theirs. Man, candy bars, ice cream, everything, anything you can imagine. So you have to decide, is that okay? And kind of go from there because the sugar does cross the blood-brain barrier and can aggravate or accelerate the dementia, but the inevitable is still there. So do you really, if they like candy bars a lot, do you want to take that away from them or not? That's personal decision. Fluid intake, monitoring of fluid intake is really important. And then they may have difficulty swallowing. So mom had an issue where she would pocket her food in her throat. And it took us probably 6 weeks before her reflexes her swallowing capability came back. It did come back. So again, on this journey, just because there's a symptom and an issue doesn't mean they're not going to recover. The journey is not completely downhill. It's not a ski slope. It's a roller coaster where they do better and they do worse. And that's kind of how they move through things. Now, in mid-stage, stimulation remains really important. And that includes going for walks together. If you can't get your loved one to walk, I had a neighbor who asked me this question, Dad won't exercise. He just sits and watches Storage Wars. And I said, so how do you approach this? And she said, I tell him, Dad, you got to get up, go for a walk, get some exercise. And I said, if your children told you to do something like that, how would you respond? And she's like, oh, I'd tell them to go pound sand. And I said, exactly. And I said, what you just did was tell your dad what to do and treat him like he's your child. You can't do that. They have lived a full life. You need to treat them as such. Again, dignity and respect with kindness. So instead, I told her, go for a walk and tell him, look, I talked to my doctor today and he says, I need more exercise. I don't want to walk around the place alone. Would you come with me, please? It worked because he was helping his baby girl be healthy. So you see the difference? It's all about purpose and being a parent and being a spouse. So tie those things together in how you get someone to change their behaviors or to do something. Visual and auditory engagement is critical. So they become more tactile as the disease progresses. So if you have something soft and furry, I don't know, like a dog, mine's standing over here staring at me. But if you bring a dog with you, if you have something soft and furry, like a stuffed animal, back in the day, my mom had a muff. Do you guys remember? There's a blast from the past. It's a furry thing that you stick your hands in when they're cold, right? Well, as people get older, they get cold. So get a rabbit fur muff, and that's something they can pet as well as keep their hands warm. So those are the types of things that you want to do. And the more the purpose that you give them, the better off they're going to behave and engage. So that means don't leave them in their room. So I mentioned that mom would get up at 7. She wasn't going back to her room unless she used the bathroom or if she was really, really, really sleepy. Even then we had recliners that she could sleep in. Because the idea is if you keep them out of the room, they're still auditorily and visually stimulated, even if they're sitting in a wheelchair like my mom was. So just, some care communities, don't lock the doors. They say, oh, you can have access to your room anytime. Well, all they're going to do is sit there and watch Storage Wars, right? So that doesn't help them stay independent. It doesn't help them have a healthy life for as long as they possibly can. And that's what our goal is. So moments of joy here would be reflecting on memories that made you laugh. So remember, I told you to write down your memories that make you laugh and make your loved one laugh. Absolutely. Bring those out at this point in time. Bring over a favorite sweater, jewelry, hats, shoes, model planes, model trains and cars. Like my dad loved that stuff. And by the way, he had vascular dementia the last 2 or 3 years of his life. So he was angry and paranoid. And so to bring something over that was, a picture of, World War II buddies, it really helped him feel better about the things that he'd done in his life, the accomplishments that he had. So you can also try different crafts. And, whether that's painting, do you guys remember the balsa wood airplanes that you could fly? Those are really cool. There's lots of stuff, but avoid talking about current events or what your grandchild did or what your kid did that day or, any of those things, because they don't mean anything to a person with mid-stage Alzheimer's or dementia. So, and then of course I said, bring a dog. Dogs are great. Let's see. So we're at the top of the hour. So I'm going to race through this a little bit because there's just so much content and so much information that we need to cover. But late stages, many of you mentioned that you're in this situation. It means loss of bladder and bowel control. They're probably not going to have a conversation with you anymore. They might lose mobility and physical abilities, like, not being able to walk or maybe struggling every once in a while with eating. It just depends. They're also susceptible to more diseases and infections like UTIs and especially pneumonia. So they do need help with most activities. So please don't give up on this person in their late stages. They're still in there. They just can't function normally as we do. And so it's about talking with them and engaging with them, just like you did in mid stages. They do need 24/7 eyes on care, and they need someone who understands dementia. So that's why we encourage memory care communities who have activities and engagement where you can visit and participate. You're welcome. You are part of a family. Mom's executive director used to say, we are here to support you. We are your support team. And whatever you need from us, we're here for you. That's what you want to hear from a memory care community. So again, their appetite may increase or decrease. They're going to sleep more. You want to make sure that they're getting enough fluids. So that, again, that's an important question to ask your memory care community. And then, rub their back, hug them, tell them you love them. Again, they're in there. They just can't react or express to you. So that's really important. Bringing flowers is a great way to stimulate the senses as well. Walk them around if they are capable of walking and point out things and share memories because they're still in there. Hospice, I just want to say one thing about it. They're a healthcare SWAT team. My mom was in hospice for 4 times. She didn't make it out the last time, but she was in it for three times. It's paid for by Medicare. When your loved one takes any sort of a major change, you talk to you call hospice and they'll get an assessment and they'll determine whether or not your loved one qualifies. But hospice comes to the home, hospice comes to memory care, hospice comes to assisted living, and they're there as a SWAT team to help your loved one recover and rally. It is not about dying. It's about having them rally from wherever they're at, and if it's possible. And then if not, they're there for comfort. So this journey in general, as I mentioned, lasts between 4 and 8 years after diagnosis, specifically around Alzheimer's. So after 14 years, we learned a lot. And so that's why I'm sharing these details with you. There are lots of living arrangements, living options, from in-home care to a place with like with Koelsch, 24/7 nursing availability. That was important to us. They need space to move around inside and outside. It's not good enough to, people say, well, what about, a house? And it's like, well, a house is pretty constrictive and it's also a safety hazard, potentially. Think rugs, tables, chairs, all that stuff. And there's no one there necessarily monitoring everyone at the same time. It's about how many people can you get, how many eyes can you get on your loved one? And that's the reason why I'm a big fan of care communities. You want to make sure you're asking the right questions. And this is actually a topic I wanted to ask you guys about if you wanted to hear about what questions to ask memory care. So I want you to hold space for your loved one. Don't try to control the outcome. Don't try to go in there with an expectation of talking with them and them processing everything. A hug and a kiss and holding a hand goes a very long way. So this is one of my favorite phrases, but we're a little short on time. So here's some resources. Again, I'll put this up in the link from your email. But there's us, right? Paige and me. We know a lot of people. I work nationwide, so I have a lot of contacts around the country. National Alliance for Caregiving, the Family Caregiver Alliance, my book, alzheimersfoundation.org, alzheimers.org. These are all resources that you can reach out to that know your local resources. So what I'd like to offer you, though, is a free 30-minute consult to talk about your story and your situation. And you can just email me at pam@itsnotthatsimple.com, and I will respond and we'll set up a time. Now, I want to ask you one last thing, and thank you so much for hanging in there. There we go. I got to coordinate this. All right. So the last question is, what would you like to talk about next? So here's 4 topics here, and you can rank them, right? So actually, this one says that you only pick one. So all we need is for the next one. We'll worry about the rest later, but these are some potential topics. Communicating with a loved one with dementia, understanding retirement living or senior living options and costs, how to manage someone with dementia in your neighborhood. That can be a really big one for people who don't know your neighbors don't know how to handle your loved one if they're still living at home. And then preparing for assisted living, the documents, Medicare, Medicaid, everything that goes with that. So let's see. Okay, just a couple more seconds to answer the question. All right. And okay, I'm going to end the poll. Last chance. Okay. So the results, wow, we communicating with a loved one with dementia got 1 hands down, followed by preparing for assisted living and documents. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to do the other ones. But it does mean that we're going to next in July 13th, right, Paige, is
Yep.
the next session. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And we're back on. So July 13th is our next one. You will get an email from either Paige or your community relations person at your Koelsch community, or one of the 3 of us will definitely be reaching out. So Paige, did you have anything to add?
I did have one thing to add. You had said earlier that, caregivers, especially spouses and children, don't have the tools necessary to take care of their loved one at home. We always want to think that we're the best person and that we know what's best. But I think I had an interesting conversation recently. This has come up a couple different times, and I think that allowing your loved one and giving them permission to accept help.
That's awesome.
Especially with spouses, it's that for better or for worse, I promise I won't put you anywhere. I promise I won't let you leave your side. I think we're in a day and age, and because there's so many caregivers that have passed away before their loved one with dementia, that I think we need to be changing the conversation a little bit and letting families tell their loved one, you have permission to get help.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's both, right? Telling the spouse or adult child, it's okay. I know you promised that she would never go somewhere, but we never planned on dementia. That's the conversation I had to have with Dad. So we'll definitely cover that in the communication side of things, because communication isn't just with your loved one with dementia. There's also communication between a care community and a caregiver. There's a conversation between the family itself and all the family dynamics that go on. So we will definitely have a lot to talk about on July 13th. And we're going to keep this time at 5:00. If for some reason it doesn't work for you, or please email us back and say, hey, could you do this at 12? And give us the time zone, by the way, because we're all over the country. And let us know what works best for you, for sure. And thank you, Paige, for that, because it is so true that it's okay to get the best care possible. No one is really skilled in taking care of someone with dementia without some training.
Yep,
so thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely evening. Thanks for joining.
All right. Take care. We'll see you next month.
Bye-bye.
Bye.